They left like a joke I was supposed to laugh at, heels tapping a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. She turned once at the threshold, lips curling into that practiced smirk, and said it as if it were a magic spell meant to break me in half. I slept with your boss, that's why you can't lay a hand on me. Her voice was light, like she'd just told me she'd chosen a new handbag. People in films clap when the villain drops the line. In real life, the sound travels differently. It lands in your chest like a stone and the world rearranges itself around that weight. I stood there and let the door close. Not because I was weak. Because when the room tightened and the air ran thin, the first thing I learned was to breathe slow. To watch. To count. To measure how a life might be pried apart and put back together with fingerprints that couldn't be traced. Revenge is not a roar. It's the silence you build a plan in. The room smelled faintly of her perfume and old coffee, contradictory, like a lie that borrows truth to make itself believable. The couch held the imprint of where she'd been, the TV still playing the last few bars of a show we'd both pretended to care about. My phone buzzed 3 times and then stopped, as if the world had decided I didn't deserve notifications anymore. I let it buzz in the dark. It was easier to pretend I wasn't a living map of things she had used and abandoned. I replayed the line. I slept with your boss. The syllables were like a ledger entry I hadn't seen coming. Debt, double entry, consequence. There are words that rearrange your past, like little chisels loosening mortar around everything you thought steady. So many things I'd taken for granted, looks, touches, whispered future tense promises, were now suspect. Everything that belonged to yesterday became evidence in tomorrow's case. Plots don't start with a single confession. They begin with the moment you decide not to let a thing be as it is. For some people, revenge is a fantasy, a private ritual of clenching fists in the dark. For others, it's a career. I had been neither until that night. That night I became a student of paths, of who she leaned on, where her pride came from, which faces in a crowd would turn when she walked by. I learned the anatomy of her arrogance. My job was the kind that rewards caution, procedures, audits, people who watched numbers the way some people watched the weather. My boss was someone who knew how to make numbers bow. He had the sort of calm that came from assuming people would comply. He also had a smile that found the same places people kept secret. The two of them together were a brand, an impossible triangle I had been walking on, oblivious to the hairline cracks. I could have called the police. I could have screamed until the building shook. But the law is a blunt instrument and not every wound shows on an X-ray. I wanted the kind of punishment that required artistry, something that would not only take from her but strip the scaffolding she'd hidden behind. I wanted the ruin of someone who believed herself untouchable. It takes a map to find the right way in. I started to make one. I began with what I already had, knowledge. Years inside the same corridor mean you know where power hides. Budgets, access cards, late-night sign-in logs, the petty loyalties forged over catered lunches. People will always divide into 2 camps, those who are visible and those who do the visible people's work. She was the visible one, bright, careless, loud in her confidence. He was the invisible scaffolder, quiet, precise. Together they were a cruelty that could be dressed up as destiny. First I watched the boss. Observing him was like sketching a portrait by light. He liked his whiskey neat and his compliments trimmed. He kept 2 phones, one for work, one for everything else. People who keep 2 phones usually believe 2 stories can coexist, professional and private, without one bleeding into the other. I intended to make them bleed. I needed leverage. Leverage comes in many forms: secrets, money, evidence, and, most reliably, dependency. I would not rely on strangers. I reached for the people closest to them, the assistants, the IT admin with a cigarette crease at his corner of the office, a junior who kept a diary in a moleskine. They all had small grievances tied to bigger ones like veins to the heart. I listened. People tell you more in boredom than in crisis. Boredom is aristocratic honesty. There was a pattern to her evenings. Drinks at a bar 2 blocks from the office, the same bartender who knew how she liked a gin and tonic, twice as bitter, a twist of orange peel for flourish. She favored crowded places where faces were anonymous so her voice could be loud without scrutiny. She loved to tell stories where she was always the cleverest person in the room. She told me once, before the laughter turned to that other thing, that she liked to be adored. Not loved. Adored. There's a difference. Adoration allows you benefits. Love asks inconvenient questions, adoration nods and pays. The boss had been an adoration factory. He offered her what she wanted without demanding what she might owe in return. That arrangement looks tidy until someone starts tallying the cost. It is useful in revenge to admit that anger is not the same as cunning. Anger is a fire, cunning is a blueprint. I let anger do the dramatics, cold showers, slammed doors, texts sent and then deleted, and let cunning do the long work, identifying weak links and learning the rhythms of their public lives. I took inventory. Credit cards she used for nights out, a safety deposit box with a deposit slip from a bank 2 neighborhoods over, a vacation home she thought she was smart enough to keep secret, and the email account where receipts and promises nested in the cloud like small birds. People are careless because they believe in the continuity of their own luck. I began to test that belief. Small tests. An anonymous tip to a parking enforcement that had been lax at her building, a misdirected invoice that found its way to the right inbox, a rumor in the right ear about an expense report that would not survive scrutiny. I did not touch her physically. I didn't need to. Fingerprints are for the impatient. A mind can be undone by a calendar and a well-placed phone call. But the center of everything would be him, the boss. If I could fracture his reputation, the pedestal beneath her feet would split. Reputation is the scaffolding on which people like them build their narratives. The boss had one brittle spot, his public charity involvement. He liked his name tied to good causes, it made the awkward things in his life shine less brightly. So I started there, gentle and surgical. I needed access. The IT admin smoked in the alley and wore his discontent on his sleeves. He had a temper about management and a soft spot for someone who asked him a favor and then left him alone. I asked him one evening, over the smell of diesel and nicotine, if he could check something. I didn't say what. He did not ask. People who expect the world to be fair rarely get favors returned. He owed me nothing, which made him perfect. Inside the system, under the hum of servers and the tired screen glow, I looked for threads, old emails, expense attachments, a scanned contract with a missing signature. Data is a map of human forgetfulness. People forget passwords and favors in scanned documents. They do not forget drunken declarations archived in a PDF. I copied things the administrative assistant had saved in a folder labeled to archive. I copied images of invoices, a snapshot of a calendar entry that named a date in a room and the quiet hint of a reservation. The files didn't scream scandal. They whispered. Whispers are multiplied by gossip. Back at my place I spread everything like cards on a table. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds. The pieces were not yet accusations. They were possibilities. A credit card slip here. A calendar entry there. A photo of them that didn't need explanation because it had been taken where explanations were unnecessary, a dim hotel bar, a closed-door office, 2 drinks abandoned on a table. I built a narrative that didn't need witnesses, only corroboration. That night I went to sleep with a list. 1. Make him vulnerable in public, charity, awards dinner, donor list. 2. Make her dependent on things that could be withdrawn, credit, access, image. 3. Keep all steps unsuspicious, tied to plausible administrative failures. 4. Ensure the collapse would look like consequence, not vindictiveness. Plans are only as good as their contingencies. The first contingency, he could sense a threat and move. He was a man used to controlling variables, he might shift. The second contingency, she could sense the pressure and bolt, she was volatile enough to run. Both moves had advantages and dangers. If he moved fast, he might burn whatever I couldn't afford to see destroyed. If she ran, I'd have to track her across a web of accounts and safe houses. Either way, patience would be my ally. The next morning I walked into the office as if nothing had happened. The elevator smelled like lemon cleaner and ambition. People greeted me with the obliging smiles of people who wanted to believe in routine. I answered questions about projects I had not yet finished. I kept my face neutral, my voice measured. That's how it starts in the movies, you collapse into a kindly old stranger. In real life, you file a formal complaint, you file taxes, you file grievances. In revenge you file things differently, you plant seeds. At lunch I texted an unknown number, a fragmented note that implied irregularities in bookkeeping. The number I used was an old burner, one that could not be traced back to me directly because the pattern I wanted was not direct lines but a web. The message was enough. Within 48 hours. HR's head had a call and a copy of an anonymous report in his inbox. Curious eyes began to look in corners they had pretended not to see. She noticed the first ripple before he did. Smart people notice the air when it shifts, hubris notices after. Her text to me was a small, poisonous thing. Trouble at work? That's the thing about monsters, some of them ask for help when the house trembles. I told her nothing. The less she knew, the more certain the fall would be. When an apparatus like this starts to fail, it rarely collapses in one sound. It creaks. It sheds small, fatal errors. An expense report is denied. A donor wants proof of where his money went. A seat at a gala that once welcomed you is now awkward. Little indignities multiply and feed on each other. People who survive on adoration do not have tools for slow, grinding loss. They panic. They lash out. They make mistakes. Mistakes are my currency. I wanted the collapse not to be violent, at least not in the obvious way. I wanted it to be beautiful in the way ruin can be, tidy in public, an unraveling that everyone witnessed and no one could claim was personal retribution. I wanted the boss to feel the heat of exposure and watch as columns of friends and donors recalibrated their names on lists. I wanted her to step out in front of people and find the applause turned into the hollow staccato of withheld acceptance. And I wanted, above all, to watch them choke on the idea that they had been untouchable. The plan was set. The countdown had begun. The darker part of me, no, the part that had learned to be patient, sat down with a cup of coffee gone cold and readied the next moves. The real work is in the long waits. People reveal themselves in how they react when the floor cracks. She would learn to fear the silence. He would learn that charity cannot polish certain stains. And I, who had once been left in the doorway with a sentence like a blade between my ribs, would learn how to reshape my life from the shards. This was not yet revenge in full bloom. It was still the small, careful tending of a plan. But plans, once nurtured, have a way of becoming storms. I had planted seeds in the right soil. Now I waited to make sure the wind blew where I wanted it to. The first gust came in the form of applause that didn't quite land. It lingered in the air like a bad note, a collective breath caught and never released. That's the thing about public stages, they make small humiliations into monuments. The gala was supposed to be a night of lacquer and praise, speeches that lacquer over awkwardness, handshakes that gloss the edges. I watched it unfold like a predator who knows the shape of the prey before the chase begins. I had done the math, placed the calls, nudged the right person into looking where an honest ledger might be found. It wasn't about hacking into servers or dramatic exposés, it was about the slow, inexorable reveal that happens when paperwork meets curiosity. A donor wanted receipts. An auditor found a line item that didn't reconcile. The charity's public relations team, accustomed to polishing, suddenly needed an alibi. The boss, who drank compliments like water, didn't see the first ripple because he was busy arranging the perfect angle for a photograph. He saw it when the headline came in someone else's voice, "Inquiry launched into charity expenses." The headline was small, 2 short lines on a news site, but it hummed like an insect in the ear of everyone he wanted to keep quiet. She called me that evening from a taxi, her voice a rapid string of syllables, nerves dressed up in lipstick. "They're asking questions." Her words were an attempt at panic, threaded with the same arrogance that had always allowed her to perform as if nothing was dangerous. "They'll find nothing. He's careful." She laughed as if the sound could fill the empty places. Her laugh had always been a weapon, now it rattled like a blade against a jar of glass. I heard the wheels of the cab meeting the rain and thought of how water smooths edges. Her certainty had always been a riverbank. I began to remove the soil. "You should leave town," I said. She gave me a sound like a snort, sharp and incredulous. "Leave? For what? To hide? Do you think I actually feel?" Her voice trailed, then perked. "I have friends. I have people. Friends are a currency that changes value with crisis. Some are at market rate, attendance to dinners, favors for favors. Others have deeper bonds." She was rich in the first kind. I had relied on that. I had not expected deeper fidelity to appear on her side. People who live by adoration rarely have rescuers. You should lay low, I repeated, quieter. For now. There was a pause. You're enjoying this, she said finally. You always did enjoy being the wounded one. I let the silence be its own answer. People assume silence is shame. Sometimes it's strategy. I had already set down the next 3 moves, the ones that would give the inquiry legs, that would ensure the news cycle kept finding something else to chew on. First, a leaked document, one that suggested an irregular reimbursement from a corporate donor. Second, a misdelivered invoice that placed the charity's name beside a hotel room. Third, a subtle reorganization of contact lists so the boss's outreach to donors would land in inboxes that were suddenly keener to ask questions. I did not know if the boss suspected me, I hoped not. Suspicion redirects attention, and attention complicates plans. It's like shining a light on a spider web, you might see it, but you also reveal where you stand. For now, he moved with graceful denial, the way people do when the world begins to tilt and they are trying to keep their balance in public. Watching him in those days was like reading a well-thumbed playbook. He smiled in places that required optics and retreated to quieter rooms that smelled of old paper. He began to avoid after-hours events he had once loved. He placed his phone between him and the coffee cup like a small, private shield. I watched the way his hands tightened around the stem of a glass. You can learn a lot from how someone holds something fragile. She handled it differently. Her center could not be steady without an audience. Where he hid, she performed. She flooded social media with images, a laugh, a posed glass, a sunset she barely noticed. When the feeds didn't lift her buoy, her anxiety showed as overcompensation. She emailed colleagues with clipped, efficient notes, she blocked numbers with outrage, rather like pruning a tree. It was a kind of panic made professional, and panic is as revealing as a confession. I knew I had to widen the dust cloud. A scandal lives by oxygen. So I placed a call to a journalist who wrote thoughtful pieces under the guise of neutral inquiry. He liked narratives that began with small human error and grew into institutional failure. I gave him a breadcrumb, an anonymous tip tied to a real document. He wrote with care. He wrote with the kind of distance that makes readers lean in. The article did not accuse in dramatic terms, it suggested possibility. Possibility, once planted in the public square, will sprout into suspicion. At the office, people began to look sideways at one another. Meetings that had once been routine became arenas of guilt by proximity. Her emails were scrutinized. His calendar was parsed for late entries. People became small, their confidences withdrawn like wells with low water. The boss's friends called less frequently. That was the key, friends call until the air smells of disaster, then their calls become gifts or obligations. The slow withdrawal is more painful than a sudden blow. A donor withdrew support. A board member suggested a pause in public events. The gala that had once been a furnace of praise was now a smoldering ember. The charity's PR team drafted statements that read like bandages. In all of it, she was present, performing, apologizing, pivoting. She was always trying to stage herself into being believed. Once you begin to rearrange someone's life, you realize how many small things hold it up. Names on contact lists. The access card in a wallet. The photograph in the right album. I began to remove those things without violence. I sent emails from a throwaway account to vendors, asking them to confirm services. Receipts that had once been tucked away into digital drawers appeared in places that mattered. A scheduled room booking that allowed him to entertain donors was suddenly double booked. A catering order was cancelled. The cancellations were small, plausible errors. But the accumulation of plausible errors is a kind of erosion. There were nights it occurred to me that I might have crossed a line. Vengeance wears a slippery suit, you put it on and the seams shift. Yet every time doubt rose, an ache that this was worse than leaving a broken relationship, it was followed by the memory of the door and the phrase that had carved itself into my chest. I didn't want his life smashed for itself. I wanted it to crack where it had harmed others. That reasoning alone was not a moral absolution. Revenge is rarely principled. 2 weeks into the campaign, there was an unexpected complication. The IT admin who had once been useful, who liked to smoke in hidden places and complain about management, grew nervous. Maybe someone had asked him questions. Maybe he had seen his name in an email chain that implicated him in things that felt larger than a favor. He hummed and paced and muttered about going straight as if life's direction could be declared. People who work in the invisibles, networks, servers, are small keystones in big vaults. If one keystone goes public, the vault cracks. I met him for a cigarette under the stairwell that smelled of damp concrete and old gum. He looked like someone who'd been pulled awake underwater, eyes too bright, jaw clenched. They asked who leaked the files, he said, voice low. And? I asked. They think someone on the inside. HR poked around. They found the access logs. If they keep digging, they'll see the accounts I touched. I held still, measuring. This was one of the dangers I had known. A nervous ally turns into a source of chaos. Tell them a false positive, I suggested. Blame a vendor sync. Say you were cleaning up a corrupted batch. He laughed then, a short, empty sound. You don't know how this works. They pin it, and they pin it on someone who looks expendable. You'll be protected, I said, and felt how thin that phrase had become. Promises are easy, protection is complex. But he needed reassurance, and people like him needed direction to feel useful. Forget you saw anything. Act like you did not notice. He looked at me for a long time. You're dangerous, he said. So are you, if you want to be, I replied. We left it that way. He went back to his desk with the same cigarette crease in his mouth, and I watched him as if he were a fragile instrument that could be tuned or broken. The next morning he was gone. Not fired, gone as in vanished. A resignation letter appeared in HR's inbox signed with his name and a reason that sounded too tidy. People speculate when a piece of their reality is missing. Speculation is an accelerant. I felt something cold and sharp then, guilt, animal and immediate. He had been collateral, that had been the plan. But collateral people sometimes have names that haunt you at night. He had been a small man who liked to smoke. He had been, once, someone who joked about how the boss never refilled the coffee properly. Collateral sometimes looks back. The plan, however, kept its momentum. With the IT admin gone, I had to be more careful. I shifted tactics from digital nudges to human friction. I cultivated a new ally, a junior liaison in the development office who was hungry and not too suspicious of flattery. She liked being seen. She responded to emails that happened at the right time of day. I fed her small truths as if they were gifts, a misfiled invoice, a vendor who wanted to confirm a booking. She passed them along like someone trusting the right friend with gossip. People who climb quickly believe their rise is merit, not the kindness of those who hand them ladders. I watched the boss at a board meeting where he had once been king. He tried to be artful, to smile through questions that cut like small knives. The board members sat apart like judges in a tribunal, their expressions polite but irrevocable. One by one, donors asked for revised numbers, one by one, contracts were reviewed. He defended himself with careful words, an oversight, a clerical error, but his voice wobbled when the cameras were near. I had not seen him fall, not in the cinematic way I once imagined. It was quieter, more pitiless. His name moved in the mouths of people who once introduced him with reverence and now meant only to distance themselves. She tried, too. She organized a brunch that read like a PR move, smiling women, brunch bites, the kind of light conversation that flattens the world. I did not attend. I knew she needed the performance space more than I needed to see it. Instead, I watched her through the window as she laughed at something someone said, too loud, as if sound could repair a tear. The cruelty of revenge is that it gives you moments you imagined would be cathartic but are instead empty and strangely lonely. I found myself awake at night, fingers tapping the edge of the kitchen counter, watching the city breathe. It felt like being alone in a crowd of your own making. Some nights I wondered whether the victory, when it came, would taste like anything other than ash. But the machine kept working. A donor demanded an audit. An investigation was announced. The charities board suspended 2 senior staff members pending inquiry. The press had taste for continuity, and the narrative moved like a golf ball down a long fairway, small, steady strokes. The boss's calendar thinned. He lost speaking engagements. His face, once comfortable in the glossy pages of sponsorship brochures, became a photograph cropped to avoid him. People who had once written him checks now wrote their regrets. She began to drift from the places she once owned. Her nights out shortened. The bar where she had been a fixture now had her absence like a bruise. Her social feed, once a mosaic of selfies and triumphant quotes, turned to silence punctuated by her attempts at normalcy, a photo of a book she might have read, an image of a coffee cup. It read like someone trying to remember how to be ordinary. On the 49th day, everything I had engineered, small and patient, folded into a public moment. The investigative article came out, authored by the journalist I had fed. It laid out a trail of irregularities, pointed fingers without naming everything, and quoted a donor who said he had been misled. The piece didn't accuse, it produced reasonable doubt in places where doubt had not existed before. It transformed private errors into public narrative. They wanted answers. He stood under lights that made his face look like an actor's, and he spoke with the practiced rhythm of someone who had once believed that control was a thing you could demand. "We will cooperate," he said. "There will be clarity." People applauded politely, but the applause sounded thin. She stood beside him for a while and then drifted away like someone who could no longer hold the role assigned to her. Later that night, she left a message on my phone that was a puzzle of emotion, a series of broken sentences, an apology that didn't name what it was for, a request that read like a plea. "If you ever need me," she whispered and then cut off. The old script wanted me to pick up the phone and say something soft. I did not. I let the message sit among others like a relic. Later, when I deleted it, it felt, strangely, like a final act of kindness. Deleting felt like closing a wound that refused to heal. It felt like choosing. The act was small and private, something she would never know. There are mercies that arrive in erasure rather than confession. People asked me, sometimes, whether I had changed. I did not answer them. My face in the mirror looked like someone who had learned to wear patience as armor. I recognized the lines around my mouth that had become sharper, the dark circles that had moved in like tenants. Revenge is a weather system that reshapes you, and in the reshaping you find new storms. But storms have their own logic, a build, a peak, and a reckoning. I had sculpted the build. I had set the small collapses to occur with the inevitability of erosion. The peak, when it came, would not be a single event, it would be a sequence of public ruptures that would leave them exposed. And the reckoning, well, I had no desire to be bloodthirsty for the sake of spectacle. My reckoning was designed to be a mirror, to show them what they had done, in public, in a way that made both the audience and the actors squirm. There were, of course, other dangers. Evidence trails can point back to creators. The more times you touch a system, the more likely the system points back. I had to sever those threads with care. That meant leaving fingerprints where they'd look ordinary, an email sent from a cafe, a phone call made from a public booth, tiny acts of ordinariness that blurred intention into coincidence. Then one night, as rain hammered the windows and the city sounded like metal on metal, I received a message that stopped me mid-breath. It was from an unknown number and contained a single line, "I know who is behind this." All of the careful maps I had drawn in the dark seemed suddenly exposed on a table under white light. For a moment, however brief, the old fear returned, fear of being seen, of being unmasked. The truth, I had learned, is that when you pull at seams they sometimes pull back. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the kettle on and watched the steam. The plan, which had once been a singular animal, had become a process with its own momentum. A message like that was a ripple, a distraction. I folded it into the long view. Someone knew, perhaps. Someone might even be bluffing. But the moment demanded calm. The phone would ring again. The news cycle would have other appetites. The rain would turn the city reflective and the glass would blur the world. I poured a cup of tea and read the article again, slower this time, like a person savoring a book they once thought would bring catharsis. The lines that had once felt like victory now read like a ledger of consequences. I thought about the IT admin who had vanished, about the junior liaison who liked to be seen, about the donor who had pulled out. I thought about the woman who had left with that cutting sentence, how she had stood in the doorway like a comet and announced her flight path with cruel precision. The next moves would be harder. Letters and articles had done their work, now it was time to put pressure where it hurt more personally. The public humiliation was a scaffold, I would remove the planks under her feet without offering a spectacle. I would make her trust fracture from the inside. That was the part of revenge that terrifies, the slow affirmation to someone that the life they had built on adoration could be taken apart by the people they thought were safe. The message on my phone lingered, a thread that might, if pulled, unravel me. But some threads must be left alone until the right hand reaches for them. I placed the phone face down, as if that small gesture could buy me time. Night kept its own counsel. The city's lights drifted like embers. The next day, rain or shine, the wheels turned again. The charity prepared statements, the board convened, donors whispered. She attended, sometimes, and sometimes she did not. When she did, she wore a mask of competence and an inner tremor I could see even from across a room. There is a moment in every plan where you feel both close to and distant from what you intended. You are both the architect and the ruin. The satisfaction is not simple. It is tempered by the knowledge that people will be damaged, some deservedly, others by accident. But revenge is not moral calculus, it is a course you choose when other remedies feel insufficient. I had chosen. Now I waited for the storm to either be blown back on me, or to deliver what I had been architecting for months, the slow, merciless exposure of two people who had built themselves on the bones of others' trust. The message on my phone hummed like an insect in a jar. I know who is behind this. 2 words and a threat, the kind that rolls across your skin and leaves you thinking about doors and locks in ways you never had before. I left it unread for an hour, then for another 2, and then I turned the screen on and read it until the letters blurred. The sender was unknown. The line was thin. The implication was thick. When you pull at someone else's life, you invite a current that can return to you. I had known that in the abstract, the law of recoil, but abstract is not the same as the cold surprise of feeling watched. For a long while I convinced myself that I had been careful enough, that the smaller moves would never make themselves into a pattern big enough to be noticed. The message told another story. I did not reply. Replies make conversations. Conversations make witnesses. Instead, I started to gather what I could, receipts from the last 3 months, logs of calls, a register of the anonymous emails I'd sent. I wanted to see the pattern as if it were someone else's life. That way you can be rational about something designed to make you irrational. When you are building a calculated thing, you learn to live 2 lives, the one that people see and the one you have to keep tidy so no one else can find it. The tidy one is full of receipts and routes and contingency plans. I checked the locks on my door twice the first night after the message. Locks are theater sometimes, people who sleep with bolts turned sleep better, but a bolt does not stop everyone. It stopped some. It did not stop the author of the note. The next morning there was another message. A photograph attached, my apartment building taken from an angle that could only be achieved by someone standing across the street or from an upper floor window. Someone had been watching me. The feeling in my chest tightened into a fist and then loosened into an animal that refuses to be tamed. I moved differently after that. I walked with more attention at crosswalks and lingered longer on the stairs, pretending to read a notice board while cataloging faces. I began to sleep in short bursts, an hour or 2 at a time, because sleep is the place where vigilance is most vulnerable. In those hours, I dreamed of doors opening. My dreams were small tragedies built from the fragments of my plans, where a name dropped into conversation and everything I had prepared unraveled like cheap twine. Waking felt like pulling myself back from an ocean I had never meant to swim in. Something else happened in those days. The boss started to look at me in a way I had not seen before. It was subtle at first, a half second where his eyes lingered as we passed in the corridor, a polite question that felt like it was checking for an answer it already suspected. People who are in trouble look for sources. The world narrows to a checklist of who could have motive, who could have access. I had both. I watched him watch me and felt a lurch that was not fear exactly but recognition. The predator and the prey sometimes swap roles and the shock of that rearrangement tastes metallic. I could have confronted him. I could have gone to HR and said, to their faces, that someone was threatening me. There is a way to make paranoia official. But I had learned the police and HR have different appetites for the kinds of problems I had created. They like concrete, named allegations. Anonymous threats are thin things that bend and get lost in paperwork. Besides, a public grievance is an admission of being threatened, an admission that implies vulnerability. I was trying to avoid being the person who needed protection. Instead, I chose to be more dangerous. There are moments where caution becomes cowardice and courage becomes recklessness. The line is thin and personal. I walked into the boss's office one afternoon with a coffee I did not need and a calm I worked at. He was behind his desk, the kind of office that says more about your life than you want it to, bookshelves with glossy titles, photographs where he smiled with donors, a framed certificate that hung like a small sun. He looked up when I closed the door and the look on his face was polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked. "You can start by telling me what you know," I said. He smiled like someone turning a dial. "We're dealing with some inquiries, yes. It's been disruptive." "Who is behind the leaks?" I asked. The words came out quieter than I wanted. He cocked his head. "We don't have evidence of any internal actor. We're combing through possible external infiltration. It would be reckless to point fingers." "You're looking for a ghost," I said. "Or someone who thinks they can walk away without consequences." He held my gaze the way someone holds a bird, gently but with the knowledge the animal could fly. "If you have information." "You're asking the wrong question," I interrupted. "You always asked for loyalty. You rewarded it. You collected people like favors. Maybe some of your favors came with strings you didn't notice." His expression shifted then, the kind of quiet that means a man is rearranging his public face into private armor. "If you're suggesting I've done something." "I'm not suggesting," I said. "You know what's been happening." He let out a breath that could have been a laugh. "Careful." The word was thin as a blade and meant more than he allowed. "Accusations have consequences." We circled for a few more minutes. He said nothing direct, I said nothing that would give him grounds to strike immediately. Both of us left the meeting with our instruments intact, mine just a little sharper. Afterward I walked the city in a small, careful fugue, window displays and the rhythm of people who do not think they are important, because the non-important make good camouflage. I began to notice things more carefully, which taxis lingered near certain bars, which faces frequented the late-night cafes, the way some men's hands rubbed at the back of their necks when they were considering risk. Surveillance is a language, and I was brushing up on its dialects. 2 nights later I followed a thread that carried the shape of a face I'd seen near my building, a man who smoked under an awning and watched the street with a sly, patient interest. He moved like someone who had rehearsed his nonchalance. I trailed him for a while, keeping distance and letting crowds cushion me. He eventually disappeared into a narrow doorway that smelled faintly of oil and old paper. It might have been a store or an apartment entrance, he blended into it like a key into a lock. I waited a respectful distance and then approached as if I were going to the corner store. The bell chimed. Inside were stacks of periodicals, a radio that hummed quietly, and a counter where a woman with a tired smile sold newspapers to men who wanted to feel informed. The man who had been watching me sat at a small table with a thermos and a cracked phone. He noticed me the way someone notices a shadow they have been expecting. "You follow people?" he asked, as if the question were both a greeting and a test. "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes people follow me, too." He laughed, a small sound. "That so?" "You're not the sort who stands under streetlights unless you believe the light helps," I said. His smile tightened. "And you are the sort who thinks everyone has a story." "I do," I said. "I just don't like being a chapter in someone else's book without my consent." He studied me. "You learn a lot about someone from the small ways they stand." "Who are you looking for?" I thought about telling him the truth. The truth is heavy and sometimes dissolves a conversation into danger. Someone who thinks they can make me nervous. It was small and true. He nodded as if that satisfied him. "Names?" he asked. I considered the risk of giving him any information at all. There are people who make a living out of being useful to both sides. They collect confidences and sell access. I did not want to sell mine. Instead I met his eyes. "Who's paying you to watch the building?" He shrugged. "Taxi drivers. Old men who like to keep an eye on things. People who do odd jobs." His manner told me he was comfortable with ambiguity. He might be a watcher, or he might be a fiction woven from the need to feel bigger than a life of small tasks. We did not get far before a hand on my shoulder startled me. I turned. A woman stood behind me with the lank charm of someone used to being overlooked. Her eyes were the kind that remember faces, not names. She asked me, quietly, if I was all right and whether I wanted tea. I declined. Connections are made in small gestures, sometimes a conversation about nothing becomes a map. I thanked her and left, feeling like a person whose reflection has been traced in sand by another's finger. The watcher at the table watched me go and then returned to his thermos. I walked away with more questions than answers and the odd sense that people were rearranging themselves like chess pieces. Whoever had sent the messages knew enough to unsettle me. Whoever watched me knew more. That night the threat escalated. A package arrived at my door at midnight, no return address, only a thin box the size of a book. Inside was a single photograph, the doorway of my apartment, taken in the rain, and a note that read, "You made enemies. Some of them are patient. Very patient." It was not a direct threat, it was almost kinder in its civility. But civility can be a blade wrapped in silk. I called one of the juniors at work, the liaison who had been useful in the charity's slow collapse. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright, as if she had not a care in the world. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "Not exactly." My voice sounded too flat to me. "Did you ever get any flack? Any messages? Anyone asking questions about?" I did not want to say the charity's name aloud. Names have power. She hesitated. "Just that everyone's on edge." "Why? Did something happen to you?" I thought about telling her to tell no one. Instead I said, "Be careful. If you hear anything odd, tell me." She promised she would. Her voice had the crispness of someone who had not yet learned how much caution is worth. That conversation should have been the end of the night's tremor. It was not. Less than an hour later I received a photograph of the junior liaison leaving a cafe, her expression carefree, her phone to her ear. The caption was simple, "She's talking too loudly. Be careful what you love." The message landed like a stone thrown into placid water. My network was not only vulnerable, it was exposed. The fury that rose then was hot and immediate. To threaten those I used, those human leverage points that had helped me disassemble other people, was to step over a line I had drawn in my own code. I was not an amoral architect, I had limits. Attacks on collateral, on people who were not the main players, made me reckless in a way that felt dangerous and necessary. I wanted to reply with force. But force has consequences. Force reveals technique. I sat at my kitchen table and planned differently than I had before. Up until now my work had been surgical, designed to look like accidents and administrative decay. Now I needed to show strength without becoming the kind of violent actor who would make the story about me. The threat had to be answered in a way that maintained my anonymity but protected the people who had stood a small risk for me. So I did what I had been trained to do in the quieter parts of my life. I turned the strategy inward and doubled down on surveillance. I set up small measures to protect the junior liaison, anonymous calls warning her to change routes, a nudge to her manager to suggest she work from home for a day. I did not tell her I was behind the moves. People are stranger with gratitude when it's unexpected. Then I set a trap. Traps are ugly things. They take advantage of expectation, of a person's pattern. They require patience and the willingness to be ugly for a time. I arranged for a package similar to the one I had received to be left in the stairwell of the building across from mine, but with a tracking device inside. I watched the tracker the way a mother watches a sleeping child. Every movement recorded was a pulse of information. If the watcher was patient, he would come back. If someone else was curious, they might pick it up. Either way, the gap between watcher and watched shortened. I sat up all night watching the screen of my laptop, an old habit that felt both childish and strategic. The tracker crawled slowly across the map until it stopped outside a dark building 2 blocks away. The coordinates blinked and then sat steady. Someone had taken the package inside. My heart did something close to a hard thing, something that felt like hope and fear braided together. I called a number I had for someone who owed me a favor, an old contact who liked to pretend his work was benign. He arrived in the morning with a face like bad news candy, and we watched the building for an hour. A man came out at noon, slim, cigarette creased, with a measured stride. He glanced around, then walked casually away. His face was not one I recognized from the cafe watcher, but faces wear masks easily. The tracker had been dropped in a trash can near a deli and would not be found again. That evening, the unnamed man from the stairwell, the one who sold periodicals and watched the street, came to me with an invitation I did not quite expect. "You're making enemies," he said. "You should know what kind." "You tell me," I said. He looked at the street the way someone looks at a map on a table. There are men who work for the kind of people you pissed off. They like leverage. They like quiet things. They do not like noise. I know that, I said. Then you know what you did, he replied. And you know how this ends if you let it. I left with the same tightness in my chest I had when the first message arrived. The world had narrowed to a series of choices: back down, escalate, or withdraw. Withdrawal was a word that tasted like surrender. Backing down would leave them in place to harm others. Escalation might make the problem worse and make me the very thing I had been trying to avoid. I was tired, thinner at the edges. But I had something they did not: the map. I had laid it with such small, careful strokes that I had an intimacy with their weaknesses that they did not suspect. I would use that map now not to crush them violently but to test their courage and their appetite for risk. If they wanted to play at threats, they would learn what it is to be stalked by a quiet resolve. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the kettle clicked. The world turned like always, indifferent to the fact that someone had decided to make a life untenable for another. I poured tea and watched the steam, feeling the slow burn of a plan adjusting to a new threat. The storm had changed direction. It had pointed back at me. That night, I dreamed of doors again. Only this time I woke with a plan, not to meet violence with the same, but to make sure that if violence came, it would find the people who authorized it, not the ones who had merely watched. I would reroute the current. I would turn the force outward and find the pulse of the operation that had decided to threaten my life like a seasoning. It would not be simple. It should not be simple. Justice that is elegant is often cruel in equal measure. I had learned that the hard way. But the message on my phone had not guessed my limits. It had only guessed the easy targets. And for the first time since the door had closed behind her and the sentence had been spoken, I felt the old, cold thing in me, methodical, ruthless, prepared to go deeper than I had ever planned. I also felt, beneath it, a quieter thing, a need to protect the fragile humans who had been swept into the tide because of me. The next steps would require me to be cruel in ways I had not yet been and careful in ways I had never imagined. The city would watch, and the watchers would wait. The game had shifted. The players were revealed, but the board was still mine to move across. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Sleep was a luxury, and luxuries made you soft. The messages had stopped, but that silence was worse than noise. Silence meant planning. Someone was out there, recalculating. And I had to move before they did. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about control. They had taken that from me once when she laughed as she walked away, when she confessed to sleeping with the man who signed my paychecks, when she told me I couldn't lay a hand on her because he protected her. That sentence had been a bullet that never stopped ricocheting inside me. Every sleepless night since then had been a reminder that revenge is not just about evening a score, it's about rewriting the story so your humiliation becomes someone else's nightmare. Now the nightmare was spreading to watchers, to messages, to faces I didn't know. And that meant I was close to the truth. Too close for them to stay quiet for long. The next morning I took the train to a district I hadn't been to in months, the kind of place where you could disappear for hours without leaving a trail. The people there didn't ask questions, and if you paid in cash, you were invisible. That's where I met him, the one who'd been my insurance policy long before this started. He worked from a basement that smelled like rust and coffee. No name on the door, no business license. Just a computer, wires, and a camera pointed at nothing. He called himself a fixer, though what he really did was erase things: digital, physical, historical. When I walked in, he didn't look surprised. "You look worse," he said. "Trouble ages people," I replied. "Trouble or guilt?" "Both." He smiled faintly. "You always bring me the best kind." I handed him a flash drive. "Someone's following me. I want to know who. I want everything." He took it and inserted it into the machine. Lines of code flashed like static lightning. "You made enemies in high places," he said after a few minutes. "But the pattern isn't corporate. It's personal." I knew what he meant before he said it. "She's back in contact with him," he continued. "The boss. She's feeding him updates. Pictures of you. Movements. But the number the messages come from isn't hers, it's one of his assistants. Someone inside his house is helping her." My pulse slowed. It wasn't fear now. It was something colder. She's the bait, I said. Looks that way. He wants you to make a move. Something he can bury you with. The fixer leaned back. You want me to scrub you? I shook my head. No. I want the opposite. I want to be seen, just not where they expect. He nodded once, understanding. You're turning it back on them. That's the plan. The next few days were spent building the illusion. I let myself be seen leaving certain places, using public Wi-Fi, buying burner phones in stores I knew had cameras. I made sure I was captured by every lens I could find. But the real me wasn't in those recordings. The real me was moving 3 steps behind those reflections, tracing their network, setting traps inside their traps. I sent her a message from a number she didn't recognize. Just a sentence. You told me he'd protect you. Does he still? For hours there was nothing. Then a reply. Stop this. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, but I did. She had always underestimated me, thought I was too emotional, too reactive, too broken to play the long game. She'd been wrong before. She was about to be wrong again. I sent another message. Then tell him to stop watching me. The typing indicator blinked for almost a minute before vanishing. No reply. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't the one in control anymore. The fixer called that night. Got something, he said. The assistant, the one sending the pictures, made a mistake. Used a personal hotspot once. I traced it. He gave me an address. I didn't wait until morning. The building was quiet, a block of glass and steel pretending to be modern luxury. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and coffee grounds. I moved like a shadow, using the elevator only to the 5th floor, then the stairs the rest of the way. Cameras were everywhere, but I wasn't hiding. I wanted them to know I'd been there. When I reached the apartment door, I didn't knock. I picked the lock, closed it behind me, and stood in the dark. The hum of a refrigerator. A TV left on mute. Then a sound, a cough from the next room. The assistant sat at a desk, phone in hand, half asleep. On the wall above her, a live feed, my building, my hallway, my door. She'd been watching me in real time. I stepped forward until she stirred. When her eyes found mine, the color drained from her face. Don't scream, I said. You don't want to wake the neighbors. She froze. What do you want? Answers. I was just doing my job. Your job was to spy on me? To threaten the people I know? I didn't send the threats, she said quickly. I just collect footage. He handles the rest. He? The boss, she whispered. He said you were dangerous. That you needed to be monitored. He said you were obsessed with her. I laughed softly. Obsessed? No. I was patient. She swallowed. He said you'd try something. That he needed proof to ruin you if you did. And you gave him everything he needed to watch me try, I said. Congratulations. I took her phone, transferred the files, and deleted the originals. Then I leaned in close enough for her to feel my breath. If you ever point a camera at me again, I'll make sure the next time you blink, you see nothing but darkness. Understand? She nodded, trembling. I left her there, shaking in the dim blue light of her own paranoia. When I stepped outside, the city felt different, quieter, heavier, like it was waiting for the next move. I knew what it had to be. If he wanted proof, I'd give him something better, a confession, but not mine. The fixer helped me build a digital trail, forged messages, altered voice notes, everything leading back to the boss. It painted a picture of him manipulating company data, embezzling charity funds, and coercing his employees. It was believable because parts of it were true. I just rearranged the order. Then I sent it to the right inboxes: journalists, investigators, rival executives. The kind of people who smelled blood in corporate corridors. By morning, the news broke. His face was everywhere. Headlines screamed scandal. The company froze accounts. And she, the one who'd mocked me, the one who thought she was untouchable, was dragged into it, too. Her connection to him was public now, undeniable. She wasn't his secret anymore. She was evidence. That was the beauty of it, I didn't have to lift a hand. The world did my work for me. But revenge is never clean. That evening, as I watched the chaos unfold on the news, a knock came at my door. 3 short, sharp raps. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a box, small, plain, familiar. Inside was a phone. One message appeared on the screen. You think you've won? You just opened a bigger door. The screen went black. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to fear, not because I was threatened, but because I realized I wasn't the only one capable of playing this game. And somewhere, behind another door, someone else was already making their next move. The city looked different that night. Maybe it was the fog, or maybe it was the feeling that everything had finally reached its breaking point. Every building, every alley, every flickering streetlight seemed to hum with a quiet tension, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how far I'd go. The phone from the box lay on my table, silent now, but I could still feel its weight, not in grams, but in meaning. Whoever sent it knew where I lived. They'd been inside the circle of my life long enough to make the message personal. You just opened a bigger door. That sentence was supposed to scare me. Instead, it made me curious. I turned the phone on. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single folder named Confession. No password. No lock. Just an invitation. Inside were 5 video files, all time-stamped over the past week. The first one made my stomach twist. It was footage from my own apartment. Me pacing, me talking to myself, me burning documents. Every moment recorded from an angle I didn't even know existed. They'd been inside. The second video was her sitting in some hotel room, speaking directly to the camera. He's dangerous, she said. Her tone was calm, rehearsed. He blames me for what happened. But it wasn't me who ruined him. It was himself. The next file was the boss. He looked exhausted, angry, half-drunk. He's been stalking us, he said. He's unstable. If anything happens to me or her, it's him. My face burned. They were building a story, one where I was the villain, the unhinged obsessive who couldn't move on. It was smart. They were rewriting reality before anyone could question it. But they made one mistake. They recorded the lies. By morning, the news was everywhere. The boss was suspended, pending investigation, but the narrative had shifted. Anonymous insider orchestrated digital smear campaign, the headlines read. They didn't name me, but I could feel my shadow behind every word. Someone was cleaning house, deleting evidence, shifting blame, rewriting everything I had worked to expose. They'd taken my weapon and turned it against me. But if they wanted to play games with stories, I would give them an ending they couldn't erase. I started by finding her. It wasn't hard. She'd always liked patterns, the same bars, the same late-night coffee runs, the same circles of people who pretended they were better than what they did behind closed doors. I found her at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Music pulsed through the air like a heartbeat. She saw me before I spoke, and for a second, her face showed it: fear, recognition, and then, as always, arrogance. You shouldn't be here, she said, voice low but steady. You're making things worse for yourself. Still protecting him? I asked. He protected me when you couldn't. Her smile was soft, rehearsed. And now he's protecting himself. That's how this works. He's using you. She tilted her head. Maybe. But at least I'm not hiding behind screens and shadows. You always thought you were smarter than everyone, didn't you? I don't think, I said. I know. She laughed quietly, sipping her drink. You really believe you can win against him? He owns the company, the lawyers, the people. You're just a ghost screaming in the dark. Then why are you trembling? I asked. Her fingers tightened around the glass. Because you don't stop. You don't know when to let go. I leaned in, close enough that my words brushed her ear. Neither do you. That's why you're still here. Waiting to see what I'll do next. Her mask cracked then. For a moment, the cold confidence slipped, and I saw it: the guilt, the fear, the realization that she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. You think you've turned the tables, she whispered. But you're just another piece in his plan. You were always predictable. Not this time, I said. I handed her a flash drive. She hesitated before taking it. "What's this?" "Proof," I said. "Play it when you're alone. It's the only chance you have left to decide whose side you're really on." I walked away before she could answer. The footage on that drive was simple: the original recordings of the boss's private meetings, the embezzlement ledgers, and the voice notes he'd made to her. I had gathered them long ago, back when revenge was still an idea, not a lifestyle. It was everything she needed to see the truth that he had used her to destroy me and would abandon her the second it benefited him. I didn't know if she'd believe it. But I knew she'd watch. 2 nights later, she called. Her voice was shaking. "He lied to me," she said. "About everything. He said I was part of the plan, that I'd be protected. But I'm disposable, aren't I?" "Yes," I said simply. "What do you want?" "The truth," I said. "From both of you." We met in the place where it had all begun, his office. Midnight. Rain tapping against the glass. The city lights bleeding through the blinds like veins of fire. She was already there when I arrived, standing near his desk, pale and silent. He came in 10 minutes later, looking confident, until he saw me. "You have some nerve," he said. "Someone has to finish what you started," I replied. He laughed, low and sharp. "You think you've exposed me? You think this ends with your little crusade? You're a nobody. Always were. I made you. I can unmake you." "Try," I said. He stepped closer. "You've been recording people, leaking information, blackmailing my staff. You think I don't have evidence?" "I don't doubt you do," I said. "But so do I." I placed a small recorder on his desk. It was already running. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell her what you told your lawyers." His eyes flickered toward her, then back to me. "You're bluffing." She spoke then, voice trembling. "He's not. I saw the files. I know what you did." For the first time, his mask cracked. "You stupid girl," he hissed. "You think he's helping you? He's using you like everyone else." "No," I said quietly. "You were the only one who did that." He lunged across the desk, trying to grab the recorder, but I was faster. The struggle was short: a shove, a crash, the sound of breaking glass. He stumbled backward, blood at the corner of his mouth, rage in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Already did," I said. I turned and left him there, gasping, his empire burning behind him, metaphorically at first, but not for long. By dawn, the recordings were online. The corruption, the coercion, the threats, all of it. The world had its villain, and it wasn't me. He was arrested within hours. She disappeared, vanished from the city like smoke and wind. As for me, I became what they accused me of being: a ghost. No address. No trace. Just a story whispered in the darker corners of the internet: the man who lost everything, then took everything back. The bigger door they warned me about, I had walked through it willingly. On the other side wasn't peace. It wasn't happiness. It was silence. But sometimes silence is the only victory worth having. Because in the end, revenge doesn't end with forgiveness. It ends with nothing left to lose. And that's exactly what makes you unstoppable.